Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is November 24, 2024. Want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Please subscribe. Also want to thank Kathy Siegel Garcia for introducing us to today's guest, Taylor Hatch. Where the heck you calling in from, Taylor?
Hi, Gerry. Thanks for having me. I'm calling
Yeah.
in from the Central Coast of California, San Luis Obispo.
How cool is that? First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Man, that's a real kicker. Having seen the show many times, I already know this is the very first. Caffeine. No, I'm just kidding. I think I've been thinking about this actually. The best thing for a human being, I think, is being human. And I can describe it in so many different ways, but I think, there's so many essentials like, being good to other people, having enough nourishment, food, water. Yeah, just being a good soul to other people. I mean, it feels like there are numerous things that could be the best thing for a human being, but I think for me, like being human has, that's been a recent lesson for me that I found to be supplemental for myself.
I love it. Being human is a great answer, Taylor, because people come up with all this stuff, love, be loved. And but I actually love first thought, best thought, caffeine. Is that what you said right off the bat? You said caffeine right off the bat, right?
I did, yeah.
That's amazing because it is a natural human it is a natural, it's like, what is nature and what is human and where do they cross over? Well, nature is if something grows in the ground. Like my big thing is, how could anyone ever sell water or dirt? Isn't that everybody? Everybody owns the water and the dirt. How do you? And I mean, it is a scam now how water is, but like caffeine is a natural thing. And imagine the first humans ever discovering what it does to you.
Exactly. It's technically water, right?
Yeah, I mean, or just chewing caffeine, coca leaves or caffeine beans. They probably chewed them before they made them who knows? Okay, really good, Taylor. I'm glad you're here and this is fun. What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Great question. I feel like this is another thing I've been thinking about. I feel like I'm definitely a hybrid between having the visual aspect of learning and very, I guess you could say, auditorial. Being a musician, it's like I gain a lot of fascination from watching people do something fascinating. So be that if a guitarist I enjoy is playing something so cool that I'm like, oh my God, what is that? Like, I try and absorb that visually. And then, when it comes to the auditorial aspect of listening to things, I think I gain a lot of interest in that too, because, I think after periods of time when you listen to so much music and you're absorbing what you're hearing, you're able to translate it in a way that you can either, apply it to the instrument or when you sing or when you, I guess, reinforce the information too. It's like, I kind of like having the sort of like a different yin yang of visual information and audio, like just the way that you can hear it.
It's really good because, there's that classic question. I'm not asking you it is, if you had to lose your sight or your hearing, which would you lose? And it's like, that's a hard question because like my friend was born with no sight. So it's different to ask him because his partner, I said, they played music for 40 years together. I said, what does Mats see? He doesn't see black because he's never seen black. So he can't go, he's heard black and he knows it in talking, So blind
Right.
people sight often use words like, another friend goes, "Oh, I watched a TV show last night." And he goes, "He didn't
Mhm.
watch it, he listened to it."
Lis
But he wants to use normal language. And this is how Morgan described it so well, I think. He said, "What Mott sees is empty, because if he
Mm,
puts his hand in a bucket of water, he feels the water. And
right.
then you pour the water out, and then he puts his hand in the bucket. What do you feel? You see it's
Yeah.
empty." So, I mean, it was just one word to describe it. But I'm curious, let's go off on a tangent question in that regard, Taylor. You're really smart too. I appreciate your engagement here. Is if if
I'm not that
the neuroscientists say sight is the most dominant sense. Do you now, saying you're visual and auditory, it almost is sounding like you're saying I'm 50-50, dude, you know, but do you think the neuroscientists are kind of right saying sight is more dominant sense?
I mean, it's a great question. And I think there's, not to make it sound subjective, but it's almost like every person's perception of sight is so different. And I I do think of it like, if sight is overly dominant, then how does that apply to the way that we hear and the way that we perceive anything? So
Yeah.
it's almost like, a good example is, so I have synesthesia, which, to give a brief like description, it's basically like my brain has this kind of cross phenomenon where I'm able to sort of translate external information between different things. So, like with music, and we can talk about this if you're interested, but I associate music with color, or certain sounds have different personalities, and it's the same with other areas. So, like, I associate like days of the week with different colors, and or different senses. But anyway,
Yeah.
to cycle into the question, I do think sight is, I don't know if it's always the most dominant, because to assume that sight has more dominance over hearing, smelling, tasting is, I don't know, to me it just sounds like it's like we're already limiting the other senses.
Oh,
But,
yeah.
if neuroscientists are saying that this is a new trait within these studies, then I don't know. To me, it's just like, so does that mean universally we can't, I guess, embody the same amount of dominance in our other senses? Like, that's a
Yeah.
question I'd ask myself,
Right. That
especially.
and I'm not trying to say what they said is accurate. That that's what scientists do. They discover things that can be interpreted many ways. So, the thing is, we have
Right.
more than five senses, but we sort of go, "Oh, we have five senses." And my my other deep delve into this is, well, what, because really sight and sound, they're dominant, and the other three are dominant too. We don't realize that they're as dominant. They're all five are. So my question sometimes has been, what human activity involves all five senses equally? Like
Right.
all five senses are engaged, because when you read, your eye is more dominant, but you're still smelling the book. Books have smell,
Yep.
and you're still
Absolutely.
hearing the sounds in the room that you're reading, and you're tasting whatever's last in your mouth. And so it's funny, because what most people say all five senses equally is sex, and then one they say dancing, and they say going to the
Right.
bathroom. So it's endless where all five senses are equally, and that's called, in the McLuhan world, it's called sense ratio shifting. So if you're
I've
reading a
never
book, yeah, it's something you sort of described in synesthesia. Sense ratio shifting is, if you're engaged in reading a book, then your eye is probably the dominant sense. But like I said, all five senses are involved, and even the sixth sense and more senses that we haven't distinguished with words. But that's what James Joyce did with Finnegan's Wake, a book that he kind of required you to read out loud with a group of people. So that's something you don't normally do with a book. It's usually you and the author and black ink on white paper. So you silently. But you go to church or you sing with a choir, it's the same. Or you go to a hootenanny. That's what Finnegan's Wake is. It's like a hootenanny. Everybody's reading it out loud. You go around and individuals read, but you're looking at the text as they're reading it. So he switches the eye experience of a book into an ear experience, because you're more listening to how each person is pronouncing the words, because it's all gobbledygook. So it's like, I wouldn't have pronounced it that way, so you're more aware of the text because someone else is. And guess when we start reading Finnegan's Wake, that sensibility is when you're a kid and your parents read a book to you. You don't know how to read yet, but you're looking at the pictures and the letters and you're hearing their voice say it out loud. So that it's like preparing you to be, Finneganese and a Finnegan's Wake freak. But in essence, there's a flip on that, Taylor, and put in music terms. Joyce turned an eye experience into an ear experience. Ray Charles, backup singer, when Ray died, said the opposite. She said he turned the ear experience into an eye experience. So it's very interesting, him being blind and what she got from singing with him. That was flip. That's sense ratio shifting.
Amazing.
Yeah. So why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think, gosh, there's so many things I could say about this question. And again, it's funny because all of these questions are something I've been really thinking about in reflection in and out of my bubble. But I guess we collect information solely to uncover different types of truth, I think at least. And that can mean the truth that we all find is definitely at different points of subjectivity, but it doesn't mean that it's invaluable information. I think of it sort of along the lines of when people have, and this is the kind of thing I've experienced with myself, when we collect information, be that if we're trying to prove a point that, something occurred on a certain day, or if it comes across as something I'm very I guess sort of jokingly, but it's true. I very much feel like I'm maybe overly encyclopedic in the way that I collect information. And collecting facts has always been something that I've enjoyed, and just sharing it with other people. But I think, there's a difference between collecting information to retain a sense of either enjoyment or a way to, soak in curiosity and so on and so forth. But if anyone else is using information as a way to, I guess, use it for the opposite of the enjoyment, outside of arguments or, trying to use information the way just to prove a point, maybe out of selfish ambition, then there's a completely different case for that. And we collect information. I mean, this is more or less my, I guess, take on it after many years of collecting information on a daily basis. But there's a lot of connectivity with collecting information to really just as simply put, just understand something. Be that if it's something in meaning, something in factual information, there's a lot of interconnectivity with those things. I recently have just been wanting to understand more about human psychology and the way that we process information. And there's just so much I find when in conversation with other people, like, and I feel like this is also just sort of a commonality that I see is like sometimes people most people enjoy talking about themselves, and I see it as a way to really understand how well I can best understand the other person. And, I like collecting information from other people, and other people can certainly, if anyone else is watching, they'll know how much I, have like a very strong curiosity to understand the things about people that I don't know. And really, there's something about gauging in conversation with other people to understand the information about what they do, their experiences, and there's always fun ways of trying to find relation to those things, even if it's something that I don't know right off the bat. And it's like, oh, okay, this characteristic or this occupation is not something I'm most experienced with, but I find fascination with it.
Beautiful, because really evoked a lot of great words there, Taylor. Most people go, why do we collect information? Survival, curiosity. And you said relationships and understanding, the understanding of the relationship between so many things. That's McLuhan's whole thing. Ecology is an organism's relationship with its environment. And that's what it's understanding the relationship. So like I interviewed this woman who won a film festival once. She goes, you got too much information in your head. And I was like, that was like a great, in a way, she was kind of dissing me, but it was a polite diss because I think I'm like, we're similar. We're curious and we want to know it. Well, no, you know what it boils down to? Bob Dylan's great line he learned from the Bible. Don't ever tell anyone everything you know. And like, if me and you met at a bar, if we met at a cocktail party, I would like start talking. I'm like, Taylor, tell me everything you know, because I want to tell you everything I know, because we're both like that. Right. Like when we were talking guitarists in the beginning. But here's, have you seen that that one podcast I had with that woman? She did a podcast on a Captain Beefheart album, and I goes, who is this? So she taught at Berkeley, and I emailed her and she said, sure. We did part one. She never followed up with part two. And I wish we did, but she engineered 5 Prince albums when she was like in her 20s. She just fell into this opportunity. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. There's a lot of podcasts of her with Prince people just talking for hours about Prince. I didn't really even talk to her about Prince or Beefheart, but you know what she teaches? She's progressed in her career. She teaches metacognition in music at Berkeley.
That's amazing.
Wow. I know. So it's like thinking about thinking. Yeah, I mean, metacognition in music is just such a funny thing, because I mean, that's what we're doing here. Before we even start talking about music, we're talking about meta, the deeper level of just thinking. So do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented in humans?
I love this question, and I've heard other people give different answers. I mean, it's so fascinating because I feel like I get information because I feel like it's innate, because I'm always just so interested in knowing the insides and outs of something. And I feel like it could lead to being inventive, just because, I mean, some of the great minds and some of the great musicians and composers that I admire, they all collected information that eventually led to the upscale in creativity, or having something that they want to speak or they want to evoke, if it's in any sort of creative fascination. Like one of my favorite individuals, or at least my favorite artist, is Vasily Kandinsky, the Russian abstract painter. And
Yes.
someone I feel like he's actually, I'll show this. I took this book with me. This is a book that he has on sounds.
Wow. I didn't
And
know that.
this it's a collection of poems and paintings that he's done. But I use Kandinsky as a reference because I think he solely was someone who I think gathered information from his own environment. And what most people don't know is that because his art is abstract and it's very significant in terms of his patterns and colors, but what people don't know is that like he was making even just like these little small sketches about like people. So like in the front cover of this book, he has like these little like figures, and it looks like they're in maybe a small village or somewhere in the outskirts of a forest. Like, you know, processing those things in environment sounds to me like it's innate in the way that he perceives his environment and the way that people are going about life. And that to me just feels like, in a similar case with me, it's like I like picking up things from my own surroundings, and I don't always want to treat it like it's inventive the whole time, but it's like I feel like there's a way where you can have that innateness and be able to use that in such a way where you're processing information solely out of the pure enjoyment of something, or just trying to utilize that in a way to, you know, scope out something maybe you do or don't know about your environment.
It's really good. And, you know, Kandinsky wrote that famous book on, isn't it called Spirituality and Art or something? And see,
Yeah, exactly.
you're not required to be a visual artist or a musical artist and be able to articulate your art. But sometimes they're very articulate. Sometimes people are articulate. Thelonious Monk said music is mathematics.
Right.
And it's like, you know, did he really need to talk about his music? He did, but you know, some people, you know, it's just in film too. Some people don't need to talk and explain their art, but some people
Right.
do. So that was really good. Do thoughts create emotions?
I think so.
Yeah.
And I do think so, because I feel like a lot of my thoughts, and even the great minds, like, you know, I'm sure Kandinsky had like, you know, many thoughts that translated to different emotion. But for me, I think I've realized over periods of time, it's like you go through periods of joyfulness, grief, angst, whatever you want to call it. And I feel like there's definitely a distinct connection with thoughts having emotion. But it's interesting too, because I ponder if even if we as humans can have thoughts even without emotion, because the way that we think and the way that we go about how we absorb things and the way that we, again, going back to perception, it's a matter of just collectively gathering what relation to the thought has anything to do with,
Yeah.
you know, where I'm standing, where I'm sitting, how am I feeling, what emotion do I have while I'm sitting on this chair, you know?
Yeah.
There's distinct, I feel like thoughts and emotions are very much intertwined.
They're intertwined, definitely. Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I
Oh, this is great. Say it one more time.
I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
I don't know what I think until, I guess, do it, you know, or take
Do it.
action.
Yeah. That's the that's the answer I get a lot. Yeah, I get that a lot. It's called do it or experience it. But, you know, McLuhan says, I don't know
Yeah.
what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
Oh, interesting. I guess
Yeah.
another one for me would even be just play it or compose it
Yeah.
um, or write it. Cause like, I think, yeah, one thing I've noticed especially is just that and I'm sure you've picked up this by now, it's just, I definitely have an overabundance of ideas and ways that I go about the way that I process information. And I always feel like, you know, it's sometimes in preparation, like, the first thing when I get out of bed, like, what am I going to do to, I guess, either fuel something that I'm interested in, or why did I have this previous thought? Yesterday, I wake up and it's like, okay, why did I have, you know, what is it about this that became an earworm in my mind? Or, like, what is it about this poem that became so fascinating to me? It's like I always have this, I guess, this sort of preconceived um idea in my mind about how I look at something, and then be able to um maybe think about more. And it's like, okay, well, is there anything I can do with actions that I have to, like, process this deeply? Like, if it's something on the guitar, or if it's a composition I'm writing, or um like, or even just, like, I read biographies a lot. Like, what is it about this person that I'm overly fascinated about? And what is it about this feature that becomes so so interesting in my head? Things like that.
Yeah, it was good. Reading biographies is so important. I think the word that came up in my feeling from your words was reflection. I don't know what I think
Yeah.
until I reflect on it or analyze it, and take another step. Uh, I had a favorite answer a couple weeks ago. Woman says, "I don't know what I think until I rant about it for 30 minutes." I thought that was
That's one
great.
way to get it out.
Yeah, if you ran about for something for 30 minutes, you might figure out how you can
Oh,
humans.
believe I've like
Yeah.
I do that. I find like I have people will sometimes like catch me on this, because like I have a tendency to go down like very extreme rabbit holes, and like, you know it's there's always the feeling of like, wait, where was point A in all of this?
Yeah.
Because I went from point B through Z, especially.
No, the through line thing is important. I love that when you get lost. Okay, can humans think without language?
Ooh, good golly. I definitely think so. Um, it sort of goes back to the saying, and you see this now everywhere, but it's like, when words fail, music speaks.
Yeah.
I remember I was reading something by Brad Meldau, who's one of my, like, musical heroes, and like, he was basically quoting the same thing. And he's, of course, I mean, a musical genius in his own mind, but I think he also has this very calm approach about the way that he sees life. And I mean, I've never met him, but I can gauge just from listening to him that, like, he's the kind of person that doesn't like to verbally describe what he's thinking, but let the form of creation or his way of playing completely, like, be completely used as a form of language. And
Yeah.
I think of it also like, in art, sometimes you don't even need words to describe something.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't even matter, like, if it requires any kind of language. I feel like language is definitely supplemental to creation.
Yeah.
But I do think also that, you know, you could play different versions of Autumn Leaves, and even without describing what you did, like, you can still play Autumn Leaves in the same way, but it's your own way of expression. And that's something I try and even tell students, is that when you're playing an instrument, or if you're, kind of changing in between, like, what you read on the page versus how you play the instrument, um there really is there's a relationship with how, like, you play the first note of the piece, but the page can only be so much of a reference to give you that sort of indication of what you're doing versus like how am I presenting myself and my own artistry when I start.
Yeah, that's Captain Beefheart said that music is just black ants crawling on white paper.
Exactly.
But no, that's a language. That means this and that. Well, of course it does, and that's good. But you also, I love this.
Exactly.
You evoked Igor Stravinsky gave lectures on how music means nothing.
Right.
So we're like, oh well, it puts me, a minor chord puts me in this chord puts me in this mood, and we get so brainwashed to be dictated how music is supposed to make you feel by the way they
Right.
use it in movies and music and in commercials, and then they use words
Exactly.
like I love it when they go, that song was poetic, or they go that
Right.
film was poetic.
Right.
It's like, we get these catch-all phrases. Okay, so Chomsky says language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a
Right.
unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Taylor, what do you do when
Mhm.
language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Oh goodness. Man, I feel like it's the same thing with repeating the answer or at least the quote of when words fail, music speaks, or art
Yeah,
speaks even without words.
yeah,
I feel like I've been thinking about this also. Like, how can I best create without having to use words or language? It's simply with composition.
yeah,
I've found that that's become a way for me to evoke areas of not only using language, but like treating like if I'm composing for a big band or orchestra or any ensemble, like the thing I've been trying to reinforce this idea about the way of how I approach it and just how like, you know, not only to describe like what is it that I'm writing, but like, there could be enough information with just the way that every person hears the music or going back to Kandinsky, like how they visualize what he put down just with a brush and a canvas.
yeah,
So that to me feels like there's there are ways to not even use language, but interpretation I think is just such a I don't know if I'd call it a lost art now because I feel like so many of us as artists and thinkers and creators are all using a way to encapsulate the way that we see things and the way that we interpret without only describing it in words, but like, you know, having different ways that we evoke the art itself. Like that to me
yeah,
has been something where I don't only want to fixate on like, I'm a jazz guitar player. That may be true, but I play guitar and
yeah,
that's universal. And there's a lot
yeah,
of connectivity with only removing, the labels, I guess. But,
yeah,
in the way that society is now, it's like, we have labels and they can certainly identify how artists perform or how they best represent themselves. But like at the core, it's like, you know, there's something big and universal with that.
yeah. Really good. We're gonna get into music eventually, though we can't avoid it. But it's like when they asked Frank Zappa, "What do you think of jazz rock fusion?" He goes, "The only fusion I see is between the artist, the musician, and the cash box,"
Right.
because they knew if you put 4/4 to jazz, then more people will buy it and have a rock beat to it. And he helped
Exactly.
invent jazz rock fusion. I mean, but
Right.
anyways, again, it's like dude, that's how you sell records. Here's the jazz rock fusion section, here's this section. So you want to make money selling your music and make more, then blah blah blah. So your
Right.
observations, yeah. And the other thing you said I love is words fail, music speaks. Is if you can't say it, sing it. If you can't sing
Right.
it, dance it. I love that one.
Exactly.
And so your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Oh goodness. These days, I think we're more thinking. I think that because literally, um, I definitely, I think that we're more thinking beings because it goes back to what we talked about earlier. Because all we're doing is processing information, and
Yeah.
we're utilizing it with different meaning. And I say that not to sound like pessimism or anything, but I do get the sense that we're using different modes of thinking as a way to present information or proof points, or basically use it as a way to represent what we think at the core is the right information or the more direct information. Like I see this a lot, especially in media, that um, with describing how individuals work in any industry, it's like saying if you look at, let's say, Jeff Bezos. I mean, everyone knows him to be, a highly skilled, CEO of one of the biggest companies out there. But also, it's like, you know, who really knows, like, if Jeff Bezos is as much of a feeling person, depending on what he does, versus if he's only thinking about the
Yeah.
specifics of like, this is the economy, this is the business we're running, and so on and so forth. So, and you see it in media too. Like, you kind of, people just want to see information for proof. And everything is so, I feel like it can be so backed up because the way that we process information and the way that we see things, it goes back to the saying, and I don't know who originally quoted it, but seeing is believing, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that to me feels like there's sort of like internal conflict with the way that humans think in the way versus, how we feel about certain scenarios. And
Yeah.
that's that I think is also, it's a, I mean, it's not like reducing the thinking is going to make things better. It's more like you reinforce the thinking to have sort of that marriage between how the thoughts can evoke the emotion and ways can you find a new way to center the core with value, with a sort of value that I feel like can distinctively connect those two.
Yeah. Taylor, I'm glad you said thinking, because 80% of people say we're more feeling beings, but here's how they say it. I think we're more feeling beings. They literally say the word think before they say feeling. And when
Right.
you say core is good because it's probably like this. You can't separate thinking from feeling, but we think we can because we invented the word thinking and we invented the word feeling. And Bridget Bardot,
Exactly.
if you listen to my podcast, you've heard this a million times. Bridget Bardot says, when I make love, I don't think. I'm like, good luck. How do you turn your brain off? And, people
Right.
who meditate. Okay, think about not thinking. And then there's that bumper
Right.
sticker on my street. It says, don't believe everything you think. And I'm like, well, you could say,
Right.
don't believe everything you feel. So here's
Right.
two questions from the 50s. Alan Turing. One, is thinking a
Oh yeah.
function is thinking a function of the soul?
Oof. Gosh, that's hard. Is thinking a function of the soul? I think it can be, if it means, it's sort of like, not to make this sound mathematical, but you know, thinking and emotion combined will definitely have like deeper connection and meaning to the soul, I think, at least. Um, but it's also like it's reverse order too. Like
Yeah.
emotion, I think, could also cause a way that we think about any scenario. If it's people we love versus music we enjoy versus certain events and the way that we communicate. Gosh, I feel like it can be universally intertwined, but thinking can be a direct connection to the soul, at least if the thoughts in mind have a relation, or I guess a newfound connection with the soul. Something I think is so cool is, I mean, I find that there's a lot of people that I've read about them or exposed to, and a lot of people, at least that you see commonly, like a good example would be Oprah Winfrey. She, I think, she's a person that I think really is, I guess to put it simply, like, she knows how to connect her thoughts with soulful meaning. And I think and hopefully that's not like treated more like it's I guess, like a trademark, like leading more towards a trademark, like this is a model that, people need to model. But I reference her because I think that there's something very unique about, like, the way she converses with people and the way that she connects soulful connectivity in the way that she's thinking about subjects with people. That's where I feel like there is universal connection with how thinking can be connected to soulful meaning.
Yeah. Really good, Taylor, because I said if they can run Ronald Reagan, we should have ran Oprah for president years ago. Come on.
Right.
Oprah and Angela Davis, please. But the second Turing question is, can machines think?
Oof. In the age we live in now, where AI is, becoming more and more recognized, that I think is, and maybe some people will hate me for saying this, but I don't think so. Like, I don't think machines can entirely encapsulate the way that we think and the way that we feel. Like, I used to, kind of joke around with friends, or at least, to an extent, like, I think of it solely like, there would always be these little machines on, like, or these little databases on Google where you could basically, like, press a button or click on it, and it would basically recreate, like, a song in the style of Bach or Beethoven or Debussy. And to me, that just feels very, like, disassociate to, like, relying on something to recreate something versus, like, there's a 60 Minutes video that I haven't watched in a while, but, like, there's a 12-year-old girl from, I forget where in Europe. I forget if she's Polish or German, but, she was being interviewed by one of the reporters for 60 Minutes. And he basically said, can you recreate this, not recreate, but, like, play a song in the style of Bach in B flat. And she would just play it so naturally with idealistic ways of changing the harmony and alternating between a few different keys, but still being in B flat. Like, I gained so much interest in that, watching, anyone play, with the same amount of sensibility and the same feeling of characteristic that some of the great composers played this music. And I don't think as much as a machine can do that now and be able to utilize it for universal purposes, it's like, to me, I feel like that detracts from, basically just watching a human do it and still embody that same feel and characteristic.
Yeah, don't worry. Your first question, being human, is really reinforced with what you just said. And don't say people hate you, because most people say, no, machines can't think. They can process, blah, blah, blah. But you do have to check out, because I got into it with the amazing Willie Schwartz, who played accordion with Tom Waits. Amazing. Just the other day, he's an amazing guy. And I told him about Conlon Nancarrow, and I was like, well, have you ever heard Conlon Nancarrow?
I don't think so, no.
Oh, you got to check him out. He is so amazing. he basically is a composer, and the Kronos Quartet's done his music, and Frank Zappa started hoiking him up, and Laurie Anderson said, you got to listen to him. Basically, he punched holes in paper, and that's his
Okay.
instrument. He composed
Yeah.
on piano rolls, and it's really avant-garde. In a way, you know, could he have had a machine make this punching holes in paper? You go to a Conlon and
Right.
Carroll concert and you sit there and there's no human on stage. It's a player
Right.
piano.
Yeah.
But he's still human, and there's we did a Skype with him years ago before there was even Skype or Zoom, and in Trimkin. Watch the film Trimkin when he
Okay.
studied Conlon's music so deeply, and he says one piano roll, there's a note, and we can't tell if you punch the hole or not. And Conlon goes, quit hassling me. It's like, yeah, I don't want to decide. You know, I'm human. Because it's so precise. It is like a machine. You know, ding, 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 ding.
Exactly.
You know, and so I mean that's what music is, but there's no variation. Well, I guess if you're pumping a player piano with your foot, there's the variation.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But in its essence, the piano roll dictates the notes. You know, you
Right.
can't. You know. Anyways, I diverted. Sorry. What do you pursue
No,
more,
good.
happiness or meaning?
Oof. I mean, these days, I think for me, I've just been pursuing meaning more.
Yeah.
And I'm careful with how I say this because I feel like throughout, I mean, I'm still young and I still have, you know, more time to figure out however much meaning I can, you know, get my hands on. But I've noticed particularly that like there seems to be a media centric idea about how we perceive happiness. I think a lot of it, like over time, I've read a lot of different books about more in the self-help realm, but like how people pursue happiness or how people find ways to reinforce their thinking. Or in some instances, like one of my favorite authors is Mark Manson. Just quick disclaimer, can I swear just quickly? Because the book kind of has some. Okay,
Yes.
so the book. Okay. So one of my favorite books is called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. And his take on this is like basically screw how you think, you know, happiness works in a modern day society. His whole point is like, you know, you can find better things to, you know, basically give a shit about. But the whole idea in his own context, I call it, I've been telling people like I sort of call it blunt psychology. Like it's sort of this wake up call where you pretty much just have this, you now have, this was sort of in my case too, like after discovering Manson and his work, just how much people are overthinking how happiness is. And it's not saying that like, you know, you can't, you know, it's not to say that happiness is not an essential thing, but it's sort of like it's now rebranded just in the way that we read it and the way that people are talking about it. And again, you know, I'm careful with how I'm speaking of this, but but I feel like meaning to me has been a more central thing in how I'm finding meaning in how I create, how I interact with people, and pretty much just trying to uncover things about myself that maybe have like a central meaning that maybe I don't even know about. And that could either be just something I've gained from having a conversation with another person or experiencing concerts or just being transformed by something so interesting. Like I definitely, you know, this is another thing that I'll, you know, throw out there, especially because a lot of my circles. I mean, so I'm on the autism spectrum, and I've recently, or at least over many years, have tried to uncover just the meaning of like how people perceive, autism or ADHD or bipolar disorder, and basically neurodiversity at large. And something I think that's so profound is how nowadays we are finding more instances of like, these characteristics in people they're no different than, what everybody else sees in other people. It's like we're now, or at least over periods of time, it was always like you had to label, okay, this person has such thing. And then, people are sort of like stuck with that mindset of like, okay, like this person functions this way and da 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 da. And there's just too much, there's too much labeling on that, I think, instead of like, yeah, this is a person, and it's like, yeah, a lot of my idols are especially neurodivergent. So they process things in a way that is just so, it's like, I very much cling on to that. It's like that same weird energy that you have on stage or in this interview, or how you talk with your audience. It's like, I embody that. I definitely like gain that same interest and fascination with that.
Really good, Taylor, because my nephew's special needs, whatever, and you can't use that even anymore. You say neurodivergent. And many years ago, his sister said, Mike is not special needs, he's special abilities. He was the most friendly of everybody in our family. Walking down the street, he would say hello to anyone, and that's how we should be.
Yep.
And McLuhan nailed it. McLuhan nailed it. He said, you can't prove you're sane unless you have discharge papers from a mental hospital. Which is a great line for all the neurodivergent, and then when you said self-help, I had to say, the guy goes into the bookstore and he says, where's the self-help books? And the clerk goes, wouldn't that defeat the whole purpose?
No, exactly. That's where I feel like there's just, people who are happy can certainly write about how they've uncovered ways to really keep channeling their happiness. But to me, it's like, it all goes back to meaning. You can even find meaning in happiness, especially like, I actually want to bring that back to you. So like in your case, like, what have you been finding that's been super meaningful to you that maybe is channeled through a sense of happiness and joyfulness?
Well, I would say every, 4 podcasts a week, intense interviews with people is a way to be happy for me, because it's a routine that I feel like I'm getting into a warm bath. Like McLuhan said, you read the newspaper in the morning, like, or check your email, like you're getting in a warm bath. It's the environment. It doesn't matter what you read. It's always the same shit. But I mean but it goes to, the meaning is how everybody approaches talking about these questions. So, I mean, I got that question from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And he said, happiness doesn't tend to last, but meaning does. But that's not always true. And, I mean, they're both important, and we invent these words and then we think, it's really a new epiphany I just had.
I was just about to ask too.
Yeah, all words are metaphoric. So the word literal is kind of the difference. Like, are you talking metaphorically or literally? Well, then is the word literal a metaphor? If all words are metaphor, yes, literal is metaphoric, but we want to assign something to every word. So is the brain more detecting consciousness or creating it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
That would be a question I'd have to ask my neuroscientist friends. They would very
Yeah, but
likely have a
yeah, Taylor, your hunch, your guess or your hunch.
yeah, yeah. I guess like I feel like consciousness is so like I don't know, we're not always thinking about it because I mean, there's a way I think where it's just like I think once you generate, I guess, certain patterns, and again, this goes back to my fascination with human psychology over the years. Um, there's there's an interest in consciousness that I feel like either comes from being so accustomed to something, maybe in environments. It's like, you know, it's as simple as like, you know, you get out of bed, you stop the alarm, like that's already so ingrained. At least for me, it's like, my alarm goes off, get out of bed, stop it, and it's like that just becomes such a custom thing to do. Or um, you know, starting your car every time you drive. I mean,
Yeah.
quinky dink, that's just it's so easy. And it's like, I don't know, between like consciousness and unconsciousness, there's I think it must come down to how everybody else perceives it, but I don't know if it's caused really. It's got to be so like something that's so accustomed or something we're already so used to. If we're ingrained either in a routine, the way that we process things and the way that we go about different aspects of life, different routines. I think of it more like if you're creating new patterns and letting those move, and like you're already creating that neurocentric pathways, then to me it's like the consciousness kind of just it makes its way, it comes in at different moments. And I kind of like also just being more spontaneous with it, like that instance of dopamine when I'm playing something, or there's something that appeals to me about when if I play a certain chord, or if a certain melody comes to mind, or if I'm listening to a record that fascinates me, like you know, I kind of just like having that instant rush of energy that comes from a sort of consciousness of like this is a response. My body feels something with it. And I guess it even goes back to feeling too,
Yeah.
in that regard.
Yeah, I hear the word visceral, and sometimes that sounds like it, but spontaneous is so fun because I worked for George Carlin. We got a flyer in the mail for some advertisement, and it said, "I'm
Wow.
trying to, I'm trying to get more control over my spontaneity." And it's such a funny line because what you just said, Taylor, reminded me of I talked to the great Don Preston, who
Oh my
played
god.
yeah, he played keyboards with Zappa, but he's actually still playing. He's like 95 and he's touring. He's an amazing musician. And he basically said, like a lot of musicians say, don't think. And I'm like, yeah, right. How do you not think? You got this Rolodex of riffs in information in your head. You're trying to reference them, but you're trying to let go of them. So I think
Right.
that's it. It's like, yeah, you need all that training in practice, but then you want to let go of it so it flows. The big word is flows naturally. But it's
No,
still like,
exactly.
yeah,
I
I
mean,
think it's
there's a good reference. I feel like I've noticed this over the years, and I was literally just thinking about it yesterday. So, like, how you know students are sometimes told not to noodle on their instrument.
yeah,
Like that to me, I feel like feels like so like it sounds harsh because it's like, well, it's just so easy to like, you know, you get more curious the more that you play the instrument. And if you're told not to do that, then you're sort of like you
yeah,
kind of just maybe it happens over time with students, but it's like if you're not noodling, I guess, or figuring things out in a rehearsal sense, obviously it's very different. There's professionalism in that, but I kind of think of it more just like I kind of just want to find something interesting in what I'm doing here.
yeah.
And to be told not to do that sort of just feels like It's like, oh, so
Yeah.
you're telling me not to discover, you know?
That is great. It is. It's all teaching is like that. Okay, repeat after me. Do this. Okay, now go be an individual. But that's that's the big criticism on Frank Zappa and Jerry Garcia. They go, oh, they were just noodlers. Okay, let them noodle.
Right.
So what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Oof. Speed of thought. Hands down.
Yeah, indeed. So Audre Lorde, the poet, said, you can't dismantle the master's house
Yeah.
using master's tools. Yvonne Rainer, a colleague, said, you can if you expose the tools. What new
Okay.
tool do you suggest?
Oof. And these could be any tools.
It can be tangible, non-tangible. It doesn't have to be a physical thing. It can be
Right.
non-physical. Yeah.
I mean, if anything, this is something that I think just more people, or at least, it should even be taught in school, but like, I think just like, you know, how can I best describe this? It's basically like saying you know, like have the teacher in the room, but just let the kids explore. Like,
Yeah.
I went through a Montessori, like a Maria Montessori format, like in elementary school. Like I was in one of those systems, and like what was different from other schools was just that you could, with supervision or independently, you could just explore what was so interesting. Like you'd have all these different activities on shelves, like as simple as like a baking soda volcano. And, they would have like little written steps. So I say, this is more an example, but it's like I kind of feel like one tool should always, be just continuous exploration.
Yeah.
Like, sure, supervision helps, but you know, how much of that, like, there should be hybrid, like how much you explore maybe with someone else's guidance, but then discover things within your own independent reach.
Yeah.
Because, you know, kids especially, and even for me as an educator, it's like your job is to not train them to do exactly what you're doing, but to help enhance their abilities and to help guide them in a way where you're helping foster their interest in something. Um, but you're not only using it as a way of like, you need to do this my way because that's how I did it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just like you're losing sight of like how much discovery can you, the individual, put into this. So the tool, I think, of exploration needs to be exercised, I think, more. Be that if it's in education, or if it just means like, you know, sometimes it takes time for people to be independent with something that they're interested in. Um, and so like, you know, exploration should be a tool that, you know, just it should have as much openness, experimentation, and that ultimately just leads to, pure fascination at large. And I love it, especially when this is fun, especially working with little kids, because, they just love to go on about something that they're interested in. And like, you know, the exploration part is just so, um, it's, it's just so like rejuvenating when you see the young energy, and it's like how much of that resonates with you when you find something that's just so captivating and you just want to really like soak that in.
Yeah, Taylor, though both those E words are great, exploration and experimentation. And what new toy do you suggest?
Oh boy. This is also tangible or non-tangible?
Oh, yeah.
Oh goodness. Oof. I mean, oh goodness. When I think toy, I definitely think like I oh goodness. I've always been I've always loved trains ever since I was a little kid. And
Yeah.
I my parents can certainly vouch for me on this. But like something I've done, at least every time I would work on something, like if it's something with the guitar or a new composition or a new project, like at least when I was a student, like I would always have like maybe 3 different toy trains next on my desk. Just, you know,
Nice.
just to channel that same that same fascination that I had when I was young. And it's so cool because people like to decorate their desks, and they have this just a way of like showing their own little creative workspace. Of course, that's a more physical toy, but I mean, if anything, but be that tangible or non-tangible, like um, there's a lot of things. Like I do think I like keeping like pieces of blank paper close to my desk, or I keep
Yeah.
like something very simple, like this is a composition book that I use, and I always have
Yeah.
it. Yeah, it's just a basic like it's something I always use for like generating new ideas or creating like you know just always having like new ideas. Like another thing especially is I don't have it with me, but like so I've always been a big fan of using like what I call practice journals, but I kind of like the idea of creating like just an open visualization of how you go about something. So,
Yeah.
I've created little like colored pencil sketches of what I'm hearing with pieces of music, or if I'm composing something, like I create graphic notation and I do little sketches in my practice journal, and then apply it to the music, and then start to write the piece based off of what visually I'm connecting with. Again, that's also more physical, but that to me, I feel like there's a good sense of having a toy with like utilizing a combination of like the mind and being able to, you know, either place it on paper, or like sometimes I use an online drawing like software just to like basically just draw what I'm hearing or color in all the shapes and all that. So, but I
Staying
suppose
Yeah, staying playful, that's what toys imply. That's what's the cool thing about music. You play music, you don't work music.
right,
But,
right.
Taylor, what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Oh no. Oh geez. Um, Not worrying. No,
Oh my god, that's a good flip.
no, I don't know. I'll tell you straight up, like, because you know, what I worry about sometimes, I always feel like there's always internal pressure before, like, especially when you plan so far in advance. Like, sometimes I come at this from a formal place of perfectionism where, I always felt like in my mind everything had to be a certain way, and, things had to be so organized, and, if people like, if there was an instance of people canceling on my gig and scrambling to find someone else, like, it always comes thought of like, okay, well, what would happen if this and this, and how would I go about it if it meant that it required me to be so like last minute, like have last minute decision making. I'm sometimes I've had periods of worrying about like how a gig will go, and it's always like the preconceived nerves of how the
Yeah,
performance will go. But and it's actually such a common thing now, because I feel like people are now so open and vulnerable about stage fright or performance anxiety. And I guess one thing that already that already comes to mind now is, what do I worry about? I guess performance anxiety. And
yeah,
that I think it comes in and out, but it's like nowadays I of course feel more like I know how to channel my energy in the way that makes me feel comfortable. um but I guess worrying like about the worst case scenario sometimes. It doesn't matter even if it's musical or um like how do I go about my day if like for a given, if anything, if something occurred where like say like I'm trying to meet somebody and there's constant traffic and I only have 5 minutes to get to the location, then it's like I used to, I guess being punctual, like not being punctual, was another thing that I had concerns about over time, and or like missing a deadline or things like that. Um, Thankfully, it's better now that I have like a different format for myself of how I process things, and then it's like down the line, learning how to not let that anxiety overrule you and start to, you know, create unnecessary fixation on things that don't matter.
Yeah. So McLuhan learned from the poet Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're
Mhm.
broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So,
Mm.
Taylor, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Mm. There has to be a direct connection to criticism in that. I do think that criticism has a huge factor because there's, I think, just an inward conundrum of how people perceive that criticism. And believe me, like I went to music school and there were numerous times, like, you know, like I just graduated from the University of North Texas, and I felt like, you know, there were times in my case where there's always like sort of the inward, like, call it imposter syndrome, call it like uneasiness of like, you know, you place yourself in this setting, you're performing, you're presenting a new piece, whatever, and like there's always that sort of inward feeling of like, I wonder what my professor is going to think of this thing, or the way that I play, or, you
Yeah.
know, all those things. And it's like there is, I think about this especially because there's just something about how we as humans oftentimes are just so concerned about the criticism of other people when it comes to our work. And
Yeah.
I feel like there's just such a different case when I listen to the people that I admire and they present something that is so profound. And obviously, people will have opinions and different emotions about how they present the work, but there seems to be like a direct concern with like, and you see this especially in education, but it's sort of the fear of like the work being what you think is in your mind not being translated or best represented to what the other person thinks. And that, to me, I think there are goods and bads to it, but it's like I like the idea that I get criticized for whatever I'm doing and maybe things can be enhanced. But unless it's solely like a person finds a way to badger my work because it doesn't, you know, it doesn't fit the way that he or she wants it to work, then, you know, is that more on the person giving me the the feedback because they think it doesn't sound good, versus if it's more within creative intention that this is a proper way of enhancing your, you know, your vision or whatever you're presenting. That's a question that I think is at
Yeah.
large should be considered among, you know, all educators.
Yeah, I never got this slant, Taylor. Very unique because it reminded me of Astor Piazzolla. You know, he took the music of his country, the tango, and changed it, and they beat him up for doing that. Then years later, when he gets accepted worldwide as a master musician composer, they would, you know, sell
Yeah.
coffee mugs with his picture on it, you know, and say,
No,
"Oh,
really.
Astor Piazzolla is great. We love him," you know. But you know,
Yeah,
Jean Cocteau really nailed what you said. I think it's very unique. He said, whenever you do your first composition or your first piece of creative creation, and your
mhm,
family and your friends and your teachers say, "Oh, Taylor, that was really good, but let me give you a few tips."
yep,
Whatever they criticize you with, exploit that for the rest of your career.
Exactly.
So, I
That's
mean, that's hard to do. Hey, dude, you're hitting wrong notes. Oh, well, I meant to. It's not that. It's just the fact that criticism is important. But I find
yeah,
personally the criticism when some of my friends, all they do is criticize, it doesn't work. When you go, what did you
right.
like and what did you hate about this piece? At film festivals, I go, so what'd you love and what'd you hate? And they go, well, I didn't hate anything. Well, come to think of it, I hated that one piece. They don't want to use
Right,
that strong of a language. But,
right,
anyways,
right.
that was good. Do artists have moral obligation?
Mm, moral obligations. Hmm. Wow, that's actually a very profound question. Moral obligations. Like, what would be an example?
Well, it's very interesting because you're answering a question with a question. That you win, Taylor. That's what this series is all about, inventing new questions. Well, it goes all over the place. I kind of use Louis Buñuel's film Los Olvidados. He's a radical
Okay.
filmmaker and he's really important, but he basically has hoodlum kids beating up a blind wino or blind man on the street.
Oh,
Now, is he
okay. Yeah.
propagating? Is he propagating that? Well, no, he's just reflecting society. But then,
Right,
Marty Scorsese romanticizes the mob. So kids, yeah, I mean,
right,
all of Hollywood is romanticized. 130 years of cinema has romanticized violence, and I've got a bias
right,
about that. But then you study the history of literature, and the whole history of literature is about people chopping up other people. But do
right.
is it like do they have a moral obligation, like even Pasolini or the really radical filmmakers who do just stuff that I mean, I don't go to horror
Yeah.
films, but horror films, for example, I don't want to see that. That's horrible.
Right.
But again,
Yeah.
they can just go, well, I'm just reflecting what happened in my mind. I'm not saying people to do that. And there's,
Right, right.
there's a book that got on, you brought up 60 Minutes, How to Kill People. Okay, now
Right.
should they ban that book? And that's like basically anyone should be able to write anything in a book, but is that now what they call hate speech? Okay, we're
Right.
banning hate speech. Then who's determining it? So I mean the question's so wide open. It's hard. I
Right.
mean, here's how a lot of people answer it. Do artists have moral obligation? Yes, everybody has a moral obligation. Or they
I'm
go,
sure. Yeah.
well, they
Right.
they have they have a moral obligation to themselves to be moral.
Right.
But then again, maybe that's what art should do, is make us rethink what we define as morality. So you might get in trouble. It's a hard question. And then you go to cancel culture. My friend can't teach Woody Allen in his film class by
Oh,
choice.
really?
He wants to teach
Wow.
him. He knows Woody's a great filmmaker. I mean, come on, he's one of the great American filmmakers. But you might
Yeah.
think that some of his choices in his lifestyle were not good. So kids in his film class will report him and say, hey, he's teaching us this
Oh,
guy who did this stuff. Well, I'm not teaching him about his life. I'm teaching him about his film. So that's again a moral
okay.
obligation. Is cancel culture good or bad? Well, again, it goes back to that word criticism. It's sort of like,
Good call.
yeah.
Hmm.
So I mean, it's so wide open. Let's just
Yeah.
move
I mean,
on.
oh no, I actually something came to mind. I mean, like
Okay.
an example I have.
Yeah.
An example I have is so one of my absolute favorite composers of all time is Philip Glass,
Yeah.
and I've been I've been so fascinated. Like I discovered him when I was in college, and I became so fascinated with Einstein on the Beach. Are you familiar with that opera?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's like what people don't know about the story, at least entirely. Like the whole idea is like Glass connected this piece of work between like Einstein's life and the book on the beach. And now you see the relation. But I think what's so interesting, and I've noticed this especially in Glass's early works, was that he was trying to tie in these kinds of, you know, very abstract, but also very like obscure areas of how people perceived work and like environment and, you know, political views of history. And he actually quotes this in an interview that I go back to every now and then, because he says like one of the most important things for an artist or a composer is with the work that we create, what do we do and what does it do? What does it have to do with the society that we live in?
Yeah.
So in direct connection to Einstein on the Beach, I mean, like, so it's a 5 hour long opera. Like, the first thing that people will think is like, I can't sit for 5 hours watching something like that. But, you know, in the long scheme of things, it's just like this, and you'd have to, you know, anyone who's listening is going to have to see what I mean on this, but like, you know, there's repetition involved, and it's like you're going to get so many earworms just from watching this. But I think Glass has always had these kinds of, I don't even know if I'd call it moral obligations, but it's like he simply was just creating music or creating his own form of art based off of the most obscure things that he could find, be that if
Yeah.
it was anything, then if it was anything that led to, you know, after he released Glassworks in 1982, like into Koyakatsi and as extending as far forward as oh gosh, what was the there was another big film that he wrote for. It'll come to me, but the whole point of like reflecting, especially on like a show like Einstein on the Beach, is that
Yeah.
it's not, everything is not supposed to entirely make sense. But like I think people have a hard time with gauging that.
Yeah.
You know, there are certain things where people will find it so like, you know, obviously like there are points to it where it's just like, you know, some people won't find meaning in it because it's just the most obscure shit ever. But
Yeah.
I, for one, find that there's just too much, like, there's too much obscureness to the point where it's like, I'd rather just gain a lot more interest in that and see like why, you know, Einstein on the Beach got, you know, less, you know, critical acclaim until 20, 30 years later. Why is that? And
Yeah.
was that basically the idea of like, basically Glass was just trying to write this piece of music solely because this was his point of view, not so much having to do with, you know, how did things go in 1979, 1980, whenever it was released. So it's like, I think it's the one thing I admire about artists like that is they just simply are fully exposing this need to create something out of the most, like, the weirdest way, the weirdest format, the weirdest connection. What does Einstein have to do with the book on the beach? Like, you know, it's just, yeah, there's really, I mean, I've been
That's
favoring
good,
that
Taylor.
stuff a lot more.
We could go off on that. This could be an 8-part Netflix series, but I have to tell you really fast. I kind of, you know, don't like Philip Glass, and I know he's great because the typical question I would ask for years is, who's better, Philip Glass or Steve Reich? And counterculturally correct,
Oh my God.
you're supposed to say Steve Reich. And one friend said, Steve Reich never wrote a melody in his life, so it doesn't matter. They're both important composers. But you've got to meet my friend Joseph Weidinger. He lives up by you, and he is one of my favorite music people ever. And he's closer to your
Wow.
age. His hero was Philip Glass in a lot of ways. And
Yeah.
and then it helped me rethink Philip Glass because I had a horrible bias because what happened was every documentary has to sound like Philip Glass. So it's like mandatory to sound like fake Philip Glass. And I even wrote a song that's fake Philip Glass, and I'm proud of it. You can hear it on YouTube. And I love it.
Oh
I
my
mean, but what the punchline was, then Philip Glass wrote his book and he said, I
Right.
went to the Zappa shows at the Garrick Theater and they had a big influence on
Right.
me. I'm like, Gerry, you better rethink you hating Philip Glass.
It's funny. I have
And
that
it's
book also.
yeah, and I mean it's stupid. It's stupid. You don't hate music. Music shouldn't be hated. You just find things that you gravitate towards more or less, you know. And what happens to
Exactly.
me is when it becomes this sound like you know, someone you love, I know who's great, because it's like you're supposed to say, we didn't ask who's your favorite current uh jazz guitarist. I mean, you're supposed to say Scofield or Pat Metheny, but then not that's not all the young guys. All the young guys, there's Julian Lang or whoever else. But
Julian
in
Lodge, yeah.
yeah, Josh, and see, for me, Pat Metheny has the sound of yuppie jazz. It drives me nuts. His tone is
Yeah.
just so yuppie jazz, but he's an amazing player. He played Ornette on his first solo album. To me, that puts you at the
Exactly.
top of the list. But I still can't. I've loved his music over the years, but I don't like his tone. So what? That's just
Interesting.
a stupid bias, you know.
It's a
In
activity.
Yeah, I mean that's all it is. It's like people like, who do you like better, Grant Green or Wes Montgomery? Or my favorite is, let's
Exactly.
just do this one, Tyler. Who's better, Oscar Peterson or Art Tatum?
Oh my God.
Come on, I want you to commit. Just who are you going to say is better? Not who you
Oh my
like.
God. I mean, between Oscar and Art, oh my God. It's, I mean, it's like saying like Duke Ellington or Maria Schneider, you know?
Yeah, that's a good one. No, it's like I think someone said, "Who's better, Oscar or Art?" And they went Bill Evans. you know,
I mean, honestly, let's be real. Like
but it is
throw in Parks.
throw in who?
Aaron Parks,
Yeah,
contemporary jazz pianist.
yeah. That's what I mean. Okay, so here's the next one. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I'd say old ideas, maybe, because like I've always been pretty self-critical of my, ideas that I thought were new, and then when I go back to them, it's like, what was I doing there? And
Yeah,
I feel like once you compose a lot of music, you start to see like, and this is something, of course, that occurs later. It's like, okay, I wrote this a while back, but that doesn't mean I have the power to, you know, fix. I say fix like pretty loosely, but like, rewrite it, add different changes, add different progressions, like old ideas for me, like it's not to say that they don't have any, you know, it's not like they don't have fruit to what I could do later. Cause I feel like there's an instance where like, Kenny Werner was talking about this too. Like you write 3 bad compositions a day and you then can just gain something from that. Where it's
yeah,
like, in my case, it's like, my imagination is so active that I always like generating new stuff. And, maybe it's an ADHD thing too, but like, you know, it's like, I kind of like the idea of going to so many new ideas at once, but not losing sight of like what I did previously that led me to, get to that loft. So the plateau feels like you know, it elevates more and more because the bad composition I wrote from this time period now has some influence in what I'm doing creatively, but I still get that fear of like, and this is just, it goes in my head a lot. Like, why did I write this? Why did I write in this way? Or like, I mean, I don't encourage anyone to do this, but like I think there's a YouTube video of me playing in my old high school jazz band when I was like 15 maybe, and we're playing like Chameleon, the Herbie tune. And I would say for a high school student, it's just like I would easily say like, my God, my tone was so bad, my lines were too pentatonic-y, whatever. Like I would like, sometimes fixate on that too much. Now that it's out in the open, people are now going to search for that video probably. But
Wait, no, Taylor, is there a video of you doing karaoke too?
oh yeah, there is. Wait, is there?
Yeah,
There
I
used to
think
be.
there is. I was so intrigued because you're really young in that one. But that's the beauty of YouTube. It's just it's fun to have your warts and all out there, and then that's like people like Joni Mitchell would never release her early stuff, and then this guy finally convinced her, and it won a Grammy. So
Right.
that's just whatever. I'm not for releasing stuff. The Zappa world really annoys me because there's 100 releases since he died. But look, at some of it, I know it's important in studying, but he had such a high standard, he would never release some of that. But now we live in a different world. And it's just everything's out there. My favorite, if you've never heard, check out Live Evil by Miles Davis. You know that?
Okay.
It is unbelievable. It's when Miles was trying to be Sly Stone in Hendrix, and but really being funky. And a lot of Miles freaks go, that's a horrible period of Miles. Now it might have changed. So then they released the 6 hours of the sessions that boiled down to 2 albums. And Tio Macero is a hero for Miles. He edited 6 or 8 hours down to a 2 record set. And I know that like every note, it's like my lifeblood. And I was like, I don't want to hear the whole 6 hours. That will ruin it for me. And one day I hit the wrong YouTube link and I was like, what? I knew like these notes were not in the original. So, I mean, that's endless. But here's where I got that question, because you might be curious. John Cage, I don't understand why he says, I don't understand why people are frightened of new ideas. I'm frightened of old ones.
Yeah. John Cage and I would get along so well then.
No, he's a master. And then here's Charles Kettering. He said, people are very open-minded about new things as long as they are exactly like the old ones.
See, I believe in that mindset so much more now, because it's like I said, like, how does my bad compositions or whatever, my bad solo, like, how does that encourage me or, help me elevate to where things are going now? And it's like, progression is just such a huge thing. Like, it just means like you're just, you're finding ways to, people say this all the time. Like, how are you? It's like, don't become the best musician of whatever period, but become a better musician than you were the day before,
That's it. And you play with people who are better than you. That's how you get better. That's a challenge.
Like that's like I'd rather get my ass kicked by people who are way better than me rather than staying. I mean, you can, this is also kind of subjective, but like being in that comfort zone of where you are in your playing is, I feel like it's temporary, but then like, you get to a higher stage and it's like so different. Like I played with Dave Douglas when I was only 19 years old, and oh my God, like that was just such a, like, it was an eye opener for me. This was when I was a student in junior college, and I just remember like, playing his music in such a way that it's so specific. And I mean, Dave is a beautiful writer. He's very reserved, but I mean, he has a very like deep way of how he approaches music and how he connects with people. But like, just to be on stage with him and like, everything specific. This is in a big band setting, so doing everything on the page felt like you just had to like really know your place. And he's up there on stage and he's like right in front of me, so it's like, I couldn't lose sight of the moment, because this is just like, I'm fresh out of high school and I'm playing with Dave Douglas. Like, what the hell? Like, how does that happen?
It happened because you made the effort to be there and do that. And you had the courage. So Taylor, I asked for 90 minutes. We went over 5, and we could go for 2 or 3 hours right now more. But I'm going to say, let's do a part 2 down the line, and probably turn into an 8-part Netflix series. This is so fun. I mean, this is so fun because I mean, usually I get through, a third. We barely got through an 1/8 of the questions, and it's because that's what I want to do, is go deep diving. I don't want to just say our cliche lines, but the thing about having the courage to put yourself in a situation where you make mistakes is 2 of my heroes. James Joyce said, mistakes are the portals of discovery, that you can find and learn from them, and then go right back to our root. Jazz Coleman Hawkins says, mistakes means you're trying,
Yes.
That is important. So thank you so much, Taylor. We'll set up a date in the future where we can meet again. And I'm going to send you my 2 funk songs, because I want you to psychoanalyze each one of them and tell me what you like and what you hate about them, especially the guitar parts.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Gerry. This was just so fun. And I know down the line, so much territory to scratch the surface on. And lots of new work, for me.
We're going to go deep into music, but also I would like to do a project with you, like some really cool composition or something. Let's stay in touch. If you're coming down to the LA area, we'll hang out, and I'll propose some ideas to you.
Let's do it. Also, if you can, because I mean, a lot of the questions or the quotes that you were talking about in the interview were just so fascinating. Like, send those to me, please. Like, like the John Cage one, and everything in and out of Zappa. Just like, send them to me, please.
Surely. Well, I'll end with one tip. Check out my 2 favorite avant-garde jazz guitarists, if you haven't. Sonny Chirac.
Okay.
Sonny Chirac sees the rainbow. Because you brought up Kandinsky. Sonny, I think, is Sonny, Sharrock. Sees the rainbow. He's got many albums. He plays on Miles Davis, Jack Johnson, but uncredited. He takes a solo. But you brought up Kandinsky, which really impressed me. What Sonny Chirac is like Jackson Pollock of the guitar. Heavy metal meets John Coltrane on guitar.
How
Sonny is that's I mean, he is like, Nils Klein, this guitarist, Nils Klein.
Nell's a dear friend.
Okay, here's what Nils told me. What do you think of Sonny Chirac? This is way before Nils was a rock star. many years ago.
I'll have to text Nell.
Tell him this one. Gerry's favorite quote from him, and tell him I want him on my podcast badly. I says, what do you think of Sonny Chirac? And Nels goes, I want to like him a lot more than I do.
Oh, really?
That is such a heavy comment. I love it. The other guy is Pete Cozy. Pete Cozy played Pete Cozy played with Miles during that
Yeah.
period, where Miles was just playing funk. The bass player is Michael Henderson from Stevie Wonder's band, and
Okay.
Dave Liebman's on sax, and
Yeah.
usually it's usually Jack DeJohnette on drums, and sometimes
Right.
Keith Jarrett and Chick are sometimes on keys. But it's that period
Wow.
where a lot of people, I found a lot of people who find Live Evils their lifeblood album like me, but some people go, no, they don't like it. So it's like Miles changed like 5 or 6 times in his
Yeah.
career, so.
Yeah. Are you hip to Derek Bailey also?
Oh, of course, Derek is Godhead. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, Fred
He was
Frith.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say Derek was like the first like avant-garde guitarist that like I got into. I'm trying to
Yeah.
remember who introduced me to him, but I talked about Derek with Julian like years ago. Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, he was someone I was just like, wow. Like, and I would listen to his music like in my car casually on drives, and it's like, this is the most obscure music ever, but I love it.
Dude, I'm glad you know who that is, because Fred Frith, Eugene Chadbourne, and the list goes on, all the avant-garde guys. And I mean, even
Yeah.
Hendrix, you've got to admit,
Mhm.
this is the amazing thing about Hendrix, who's sort of the godhead of all guitar ever, because there's a category of music on Wikipedia called noise music. So it's a
I think I've
distinct,
heard of that.
yeah, it's a distinct genre. And they list Jimi Hendrix in there, and that is so cool because Hendrix was a noise musician. He wasn't saying, I'm going to be in that genre. They just knew that he opened up the floodgates for a lot of people, because Fred Frith is the
Right.
other guy. Fred Frith is sort of like making Derek Bailey,
Yeah.
more known that genre. But if you
Yeah.
listen to some of Zappa's guitar solos um are so amazing because he came out of that same story I told you with that same listing.
Yeah.
Eric Clapton, Jeff
Mhm.
Beck, Jimmy Page, and then
Yeah.
Peter Green, the four guys from England who were white who turned up American blues loud. That's what Frank was
Wow.
doing. He was taking, similar to Jimmy, Guitar
Mhm.
Slim, Hubert Sumlin, and well, you could say Johnny Guitar Watson, or
Yeah.
the other one is Clarence Gatemouth Brown,
Okay.
and in turning them up loud. But he was also blending Igor Stravinsky and uh, Indian music and all different types, and Bartok and Varese especially. He was
Wow.
blending that. Most of those guys just turned American black blues guitarists up really loud. And they did
Yeah.
fine. I mean, they're okay. I mean, Frank loved, he was friends with Eric and Jeff and blah, blah, blah. But,
Wow.
to blend, alchemy is where you take two known things and you put them together and come
Right.
up with third unknown thing. So
Mhm.
that's hard to do that and really blend or mash two things together to come up with an unknown thing. The beauty with
Exactly.
Frank, the beauty with Frank is he did what Preston Sturges did in movies. Then he satirized his brand new invention. He wasn't necessarily wanting to invent something new. He was just
Mhm.
out there making music. So he blended rock and roll and theater, and he invented theatrical rock. But in the midst
Wow.
of it, but in the midst of it, and then he made fun of his own new invention. And
Oh,
in the
really?
midst, yeah, in the midst of it, he played guitar solos that were like, what? Where did that come from? You know, or as you
See, I'd
you said
gravitate.
earlier, noodling. Because Garcia's the same way. Jerry Garcia. I mean, who's John Mayer? Filling in for now. He's filling
Right,
in for
exactly.
Jerry Garcia. So, I mean, that's what Garcia was blending bluegrass and rock
Mhm.
and roll and coming
Yeah.
up with the Dead, So,
Ain't that something?
anyways, yeah, it's endless. Anyways, Taylor, thank you so much. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button now, but I hope this never ends and we keep talking forever and ever and keep
Yeah.
jamming too and noodling.
Yes. Always. Always noodling.
Always
Thanks so
noodle.
much, Gary.
Thank you.
Always noodle. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolute pleasure.